The first day at a new school is never easy, but for a 16-year-old girl named Priya, walking through the front doors of Riverside, High felt like stepping onto another planet. She had arrived in this small American town just 3 weeks earlier. Before that, she had lived in Singapore with her mother, who worked for the government in a job that required them to move every few years. Priya had already attended schools in 4 different countries before she turned 15. She knew what it felt like to be the new kid. She knew the looks, the whispers, the way people sized you up before deciding if you were worth their time. But this place felt different, smaller, tighter, like everyone had known each other since birth, and there was no room for anyone new. Priya kept her head down as she walked through the crowded hallway that first morning. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she carried a backpack that had seen better days. She didn't want to stand out. She never did. Her first few classes passed without incident. Teachers introduced her briefly, and she gave a small wave before taking a seat in the back. A few students glanced at her with curiosity, but most went back to their conversations without a second thought. That was fine with Priya. She preferred it that way. It was during lunch that things started to shift. Priya walked into the cafeteria with her tray of food, unsure of where to sit. The room was loud and chaotic, filled with groups of students clustered around tables like small kingdoms. She scanned the space, looking for an empty spot where she could eat in peace. That's when she noticed a table in the far corner, near the windows. It was mostly empty except for one chair. Perfect. She made her way across the room, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She sat down, pulled out a worn paperback from her bag, and began to read while she ate. It was a habit she had developed over the years. Books were her escape, her constant companions no matter where she lived. For the first few days, this routine worked. Priya went to class, sat alone at lunch, read her books, and went home. She didn't bother anyone, and no one bothered her. But then, on the 4th day, she felt someone watching her. Priya looked up from her book and saw a group of girls at a table across the cafeteria. They were whispering to each other and glancing in her direction. At the center of the group sat a girl with long blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore expensive-looking clothes and had the kind of confidence that came from knowing everyone was looking at her. Her name was Brittany Wade. Priya didn't know much about her yet, but she could already tell that Brittany was the kind of girl who ran things around here. The way other students moved around her, the way they laughed a little too hard at her jokes, the way they looked at her for approval before speaking. It was all very familiar. Every school had a Brittany. Priya had met plenty of them before. She went back to her book and tried to ignore the stares. Maybe if she didn't react, they would lose interest. But Brittany didn't lose interest. Over the next week, Priya noticed her watching more and more. It wasn't obvious at first. A glance here, a whisper there. But Priya could feel it building. Like a storm gathering on the horizon. Then came the first test. Priya was walking to her locker after lunch when someone bumped into her from behind. Hard, her books went flying, scattering across the floor. She stumbled but caught herself before she fell when she turned around. She saw one of Brittany's friends standing there with a fake look of surprise on her face. "Oh my gosh." "I'm so sorry," the girl said, not sounding sorry at all. "I totally didn't see you there." A few students nearby laughed. Priya said nothing. She simply bent down and started gathering her books. "You're not even going to say anything?" the girl asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. "That's kind of rude, don't you think?" Priya looked up at her face calm and expressionless. "It's fine," she said quietly. "Accidents happen." She picked up the last of her things and walked away without another word. Behind her, she could hear the girl laughing and calling her weird. That night, Priya sat in her small bedroom and stared at the ceiling. She thought about telling her mother what had happened, but decided against it. Her mother had enough on her plate with the new job. Besides, this wasn't anything new. Priya had dealt with girls like this before. She knew how these things worked. The key was to stay calm. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you upset. Eventually, they would get bored and move on to someone else. At least, that's what she hoped. The next few days brought more of the same. Small incidents that seemed random but weren't. Someone spilled juice on her backpack in the cafeteria. Her jacket went missing from her locker and turned up in a trash can. Whispers followed her through the hallways. Words she couldn't quite hear, but could definitely feel. Through it all, Priya kept her head down and her mouth shut. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She just kept going to class, sitting alone at lunch and reading her books, but inside she was tired. So tired of being the new kid. So tired of having to prove herself over and over again. So tired of people judging her before they even knew her name. One afternoon, she was sitting at her usual table in the cafeteria when an older woman approached her. It was Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor. She was a kind-looking woman with gray hair and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down her nose. "Mind if I sit?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Priya shrugged. "Sure." The counselor sat down across from her and smiled. "I've noticed you've been keeping to yourself." "That's not a bad thing, but I just wanted to check in." "How are you adjusting?" Priya considered the question. She could lie and say everything was fine. That's what she usually did. But something about Mrs. Patterson's gentle expression made her want to be honest. "It's been okay," she said carefully. "Different from my last school, smaller." Mrs. Patterson nodded. "It can be tough being new, especially in a place where most kids have grown up together. But I've also noticed something else about you." "What's that?" "You seem very calm, very steady. Like nothing really rattles you." Priya didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought of it as a strength. It was just survival. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward slightly. "I've been doing this job for a long time, Priya. I've seen a lot of students come and go. And I've learned that the quiet ones are often the strongest. They see more than people realize. They understand more than people give them credit for." Priya felt something loosen in her chest. It was nice to be seen, even if just for a moment. "If you ever need to talk," Mrs. Patterson continued, "my door is always open. And don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here. You have just as much right to be at this school as anyone else." After the counselor left, Priya sat there for a long time thinking about her words. She didn't know what the coming days would bring. She didn't know if Brittany and her friends would eventually leave her alone, or if things would get worse, but she did know one thing. She had survived harder things than this. She had walked into new schools in new countries where she didn't speak the language, didn't know the culture, didn't have a single friend. And she had made it through every single time. Whatever was coming, she would handle it. She always did. She just didn't know yet that what was coming would change everything. Things got worse before they got better. That's something Priya had learned early in life. When someone decided to make you their target, they didn't just stop on their own. They kept pushing until something made them stop. And Brittany. Wade was just getting started. It was a Tuesday morning when Priya opened her locker and found all her textbooks soaked through. Someone had poured water inside, probably during the previous class when the hallways were empty. The pages of her history book were warped and stuck together. Her notebook was ruined. 3 weeks of careful notes, now nothing but smeared ink. Priya stood there for a moment, staring at the damage. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply took a deep breath, pulled out what she could salvage, and closed the locker door. Behind her, she heard laughter. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Having a bad day?" Brittany's voice floated down the hallway, sweet as poison. Wyatt didn't respond. She just walked to her next class, leaving a small trail of water dripping from her ruined books. That afternoon, she spent 2 hours at the public library, copying notes from textbooks she couldn't afford to replace. Her mother would notice eventually, but Priya wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. She kept telling herself it would blow over. It had to, but it did on single quotes D. The next incident happened in gym class. They were playing volleyball, and Priya was trying her best to stay out of the way. She wasn't athletic, never had been, and gym was always her least favorite part of the school day. Brittany was on the opposite team. When it was her turn to serve, she looked directly at Priya with a small smile. Then she slammed the ball as hard as she could, aiming straight for Priya's face. Priya saw it coming just in time. She ducked, and the ball flew past her head, missing by inches. The gym teacher blew her whistle and called it out of bounds. "Sorry," Brittany called out, "not sorry at all. Guess I don't know my own strength." Her friends giggled. A few other students exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. That was the thing about people like Brittany. They created a bubble of fear around themselves. Nobody wanted to speak up because nobody wanted to become the next target. Priya understood that. She didn't blame the other students for staying silent. She had been in their shoes before, in other schools, watching things happen to other kids and feeling too scared to intervene. It was easy to judge from the outside. But when you were in the middle of it, survival instinct took over. So she kept her head down and waited for the storm to pass, but the storm only grew stronger. One day, Priya walked into the cafeteria and found that her usual table in the corner was occupied. Brittany and her group had taken it over, spreading out their bags and trays like they owned the place. They watched Priya approach with amused expressions, waiting to see what she would do. Priya paused for just a second. Then she simply found another empty seat across the room and sat down without a word. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear their whispered comments and muffled laughter. But she refused to give them a reaction. That's what they wanted. That's what bullies always wanted. They fed on fear and tears and anger. If you didn't give them any, eventually they would starve. At least, that's what Priya kept telling herself, but it was getting harder to believe. The worst part wasn't the pranks or the whispers. It was the loneliness. In her previous schools, Priya had always managed to find at least one or two people to connect with. A fellow book lover. A quiet kid who didn't fit in with the popular crowd. Someone who understood what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. But here, everyone seemed too afraid to get close to her. A few students had tried to be friendly in the beginning, but once Brittany made it clear that Priya was her target, they backed off. Nobody wanted to be associated with the girl who had somehow made an enemy of the most powerful person in school. Priya ate alone. She walked to class alone. She sat in the back of every room and spoke only when teachers called on her. At night, she would lie in bed and wonder if she should tell her mother. But what would that accomplish? Her mother would worry, would probably want to talk to the principal, and that would only make things worse. Priya had seen it happen before. When adults got involved, the bullying didn't stop. It just went underground, became sneakier, more personal. No, she had to handle this herself. She just didn't know how yet. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the cafeteria was more crowded than usual. Some kind of club meeting had let out early, and there were extra students milling around. Looking for seats, Priya had found a small spot at the end of a long table, near the door. She was reading her book as usual, trying to disappear into the story the way she always did. She didn't notice Brittany approaching until it was too late. "Hey, new girl." Priya looked up. Brittany was standing right next to her table, flanked by two of her closest friends. She had her phone in her hand, held casually at her side, but Priya could see the screen was lit up. She was recording. "Can I help you?" Priya asked, keeping her voice steady. Brittany smiled, that cold smile of hers. "Actually, yeah. You're in my friend's seat. She needs to sit here." Priya looked around. There were plenty of empty seats in the cafeteria. This was obviously just another excuse to humiliate her. "There are other seats available," Priya said calmly. "Your friend can sit somewhere else." A ripple of whispers went through the nearby students. Nobody talked back to Brittany. Not ever. Brittany's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to resistance, no matter how small. "I said move." Priya closed her book slowly. She could feel her heart beating faster, but she refused to let it show on her face. No, the cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. Even the background noise seemed to fade as people turned to watch. Brittany's face flushed with anger. For a moment, she seemed unsure of what to do. She had expected Priya to scurry away like everyone else did. She hadn't expected a simple, quiet refusal. Then before anyone could react, Brittany reached down and grabbed Priya's lunch tray. She lifted it up and flipped it over, dumping everything onto the table and across Priya's lap. Food splattered everywhere. Rice and vegetables covered Priya's jeans. Sauce dripped onto her book, staining the pages she had been so carefully reading. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Brittany stood there with a triumphant smirk, her phone still recording every second. "Oops," she said loudly. "My hand slipped." Her friends burst out laughing. A few other students joined in, either genuinely amused or too scared to do anything else. Priya sat very still. She looked down at the mess covering her clothes, her book, her table. Then she looked up at Brittany. Their eyes met, and something in Priya's expression made Brittany's smile falter. Just for a second. There was no anger in Priya's face. No tears, no fear, just calm. Complete and total calm. Priya stood up slowly. She didn't say a word. She simply picked up her ruined book, brushed off what she could, and walked out of the cafeteria with her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't run. She just walked, steady and unhurried, as if nothing had happened at all. The laughter died down quickly. Something about the way Priya had handled it made people uncomfortable. They had expected her to break down, to cry, to give them a show. Instead, she had given them nothing, and as Brittany watched her go, she felt something she hadn't expected. Because in all her years of ruling this school, she had never met anyone quite like Priya, and she had a sinking feeling that this quiet, strange girl was going to be harder to break than she thought. She just didn't know yet how right she was. The video spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, it seemed like everyone in school had seen it. Brittany had posted the clip of Priya getting her lunch dumped on her, adding a mocking caption and a string of laughing emojis. Within hours, it had hundreds of views. Comments poured in, most of them cruel. Calling Priya names and making fun of how she just sat there like a statue. Priya found out about it when she overheard. 2 freshmen talking in the hallway before first period. They were watching the video on one of their phones, giggling and pointing at the screen. She walked past them without stopping. She didn't need to see it. She had lived it, but knowing the video existed, knowing that her humiliation was now entertainment for strangers on the internet, that stung more than she wanted to admit. For the first time since arriving at Riverside High, Priya felt something crack inside her carefully built walls. She spent the morning avoiding eye contact with everyone. She could feel people staring, could hear whispers following her from class to class. Some students looked at her with pity. Others smirked and nudged their friends when she walked by. A few even held up their phones as if hoping to catch another viral moment. Priya just kept walking, one foot in front of the other. That's all she could do. By lunchtime, she had made a decision. She wasn't going to hide in the library or eat in a bathroom stall like some sad movie cliché. She was going to walk into that cafeteria and sit down like nothing had happened. She refused to let Brittany think she had won. So that's exactly what she did. The cafeteria fell quiet when Priya walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. It was like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Priya ignored all of it. She got her food, walked to an empty table near the middle of the room, and sat down. She pulled out a new book, a paperback she had picked up from the library to replace the one that got ruined, and started to read. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The normal noise of the cafeteria slowly resumed. People went back to their conversations, their meals, their phones. Maybe that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Priya sensed her before she saw her. The way the energy in the room shifted, the way conversations got quieter, the way people started glancing toward one spot. She looked up and saw Brittany walking toward her table, her 2 closest friends trailing behind like shadows. Brittany had her phone out again, held casually but obviously recording. She wanted another video, another moment of triumph to share with the world. Well, Brittany said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Look who decided to show her face. I thought for sure you'd be crying in a corner somewhere after yesterday. Priya set her book down slowly. She looked up at Brittany with the same calm expression she always wore. I'm just eating lunch. Just eating lunch, Brittany repeated mockingly. She turned to her friends with an exaggerated look of surprise. Did you hear that? She's just eating lunch. Like nothing happened. Like she didn't get totally humiliated in front of everyone. Her friends laughed on cue. A few nearby students snickered nervously. Brittany turned back to Priya, her smile sharpening. You know what your problem is? You think you're better than everyone? You walk around with that look on your face like we're all beneath you. You don't talk to anyone. You don't try to fit in. You just sit there with your stupid books like you're too good for the rest of us. Priya said nothing. She just watched Brittany, her face unreadable. This only seemed to make Brittany angrier. She wanted a reaction. She needed one. Her whole identity was built on being able to control other people, to make them feel small so she could feel big. And Priya wasn't playing along. What's wrong with you? Brittany demanded, her voice rising. Are you deaf? Are you stupid? Say something. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching. Phones were out, recording from multiple angles. This was the showdown everyone had been waiting for. Priya took a slow breath. Then she stood up. She wasn't tall. She wasn't physically intimidating in any way. But something about the way she carried herself, the steadiness in her eyes, made Brittany take a small step back without even realizing it. You want me to say something? Priya's voice was calm and clear, loud enough for everyone to hear, but without any hint of anger. Okay, I'll say something. She paused, looking directly into Brittany's eyes. I've been to 6 different schools in 4 different countries. I've been the new kid more times than I can count. I've met a lot of people like you along the way. People who think that making others feel small will somehow make them feel bigger. People who mistake cruelty for strength and fear for respect. Brittany's mouth opened, but no words came out. She hadn't expected this, Priya continued. You spent weeks trying to break me. You ruined my books. You turned people against me. You dumped food on me in front of everyone and posted it online for the world to see. And you know what? None of it worked. Because you can't break someone who's already learned how to put themselves back together. The silence in the cafeteria was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the teachers on duty seemed frozen in place. But here's what I don't understand, Priya said, tilting her head slightly. Why me? Out of everyone in this school, why did you choose to target the quiet girl who reads books alone? What did I ever do to you? Brittany's face had gone red. Her hands were shaking slightly at her sides. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. You think you're so special? Brittany spat out, but her voice had lost some of its venom. You think you're so much better than everyone else? No, Priya said simply. I don't. I just want to be left alone. But you wouldn't allow that, would you? You saw someone who didn't care about your popularity or your approval, and that bothered you. Because deep down, you need everyone to care. You need everyone to be afraid of you. And when someone isn't, you don't know what to do. She took a step closer, and Brittany actually flinched. So here's my question for you, Brittany, and I want you to really think about it. Priya's voice dropped lower, but somehow it carried even further in the silent room. Why does making me feel small make you feel big? What's so broken inside you that this is how you have to live? The words hung in the air like a spell. Brittany's face went through a rapid series of emotions, anger, confusion, and then, just for a second, something that looked almost like pain. Nobody had ever asked her that before. Nobody had ever looked past her cruelty to question what was driving it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The 2 girls stood facing each other, the whole cafeteria watching in stunned silence. Then Brittany's lower lip trembled. Just slightly. Just for a second. She quickly masked it with a sneer, but the damage was done. People had seen it. Whatever, Brittany said, her voice cracking slightly. You're not worth my time. She turned and walked away, her friends hurrying to follow. But she didn't walk with her usual confidence. Her shoulders were hunched. Her head was down. She looked smaller somehow, like Priya's words had deflated something inside her. The cafeteria slowly came back to life. Whispers spread like ripples in a pond. But the tone was different now. People weren't laughing at Priya anymore. They were looking at her with something that might have been respect. Priya sat back down and picked up her book. Her hands were steady, but inside her heart was pounding. She hadn't planned any of that. The words had just come out, years of silent observations finally finding their voice. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing for certain. Something had shifted. And things at Riverside High would never be quite the same. The cafeteria confrontation became the only thing anyone talked about for days. But this time, the story being passed around wasn't about Priya being humiliated. It was about how she had stood up to Brittany Wade and made her back down without raising her voice or throwing a single insult. The videos from that day spread online. But they told a different story than the one Brittany had wanted. Comments flooded in praising Priya's composure and questioning why Brittany was so cruel. Some people even started calling out the students who had laughed along with the bullying. For the first time, the tide was turning. Priya noticed the change almost immediately. Students who had avoided her for weeks suddenly started making eye contact. A few even smiled at her in the hallways. One girl from her English class stopped her after the bell and quietly said, "That was really brave, what you did. I'm sorry I never said anything before." Priya just nodded and thanked her. She didn't feel brave. She had simply reached a point where staying silent felt worse than speaking up. But while Priya's social standing was slowly improving, Brittany's was crumbling. Her usual group of followers seemed uncertain now, like they were questioning whether being associated with her was still worth it. Whispers followed her through the hallways, and for the first time, she was the one avoiding eye contact. Then, 3 days after the confrontation, something unexpected happened. Priya was sitting in her usual spot in the cafeteria, reading a new book, when Vice Principal Okonkwo approached her table. Mrs. Okonkwo was a tall woman with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was known around school for being fair but firm, the kind of administrator students actually respected. "Priya," she said warmly, "do you have a minute? I'd like to speak with you in my office." Priya's stomach dropped. She immediately wondered if she was in trouble for the cafeteria incident. Maybe Brittany had complained. Maybe standing up for herself had somehow crossed the line, but Mrs. Okonkwo's expression didn't look angry. If anything, she seemed almost excited about something. "Of course," Priya said, gathering her things as they walked through the hallways toward the administrative offices. Priya noticed students watching them with curiosity. Being called to the vice principal's office was never a good sign, and she could practically feel the rumors starting to form once inside the office. Mrs. Okonkwo closed the door and gestured for Priya to sit down. She took a seat behind her desk and smiled. "First of all," she said, "you're not in any trouble. I actually wanted to talk to you about something rather exciting." Priya felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Okay," Mrs. Okonkwo folded her hands on the desk. "I received a call this morning from the district office. They've been organizing a special assembly for next month, part of a new initiative focused on global awareness and youth leadership. They've been reaching out to schools across the state, looking for students with unique international experiences to speak." She paused, her smile widening. "Your name came up, Priya, or should I say your mother's name came up and then yours." Priya blinked. "My mother?" "Yes, I understand she recently accepted a position as ambassador to the United Nations. Is that correct?" For a moment, Priya didn't know what to say. She had never mentioned her mother's job to anyone at school. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't something she advertised either. She had learned long ago that telling people about her mother's career changed the way they treated her. Some became overly friendly, hoping to gain something. Others became resentful, assuming she was spoiled or privileged. It was easier to just keep quiet. "Yes," Priya finally said. "She started a few months ago." Mrs. Okonkwo nodded. "The district office was very impressed when they learned about your background. 4 countries, 6 schools, and extensive volunteer work with refugee youth programs. They would like you to speak at the assembly about your experiences." about what it's like to constantly adapt to new cultures, new schools, new challenges, about the work you've done helping other young people who have been displaced from their homes. Priya felt her cheeks warm. The volunteer work was something she cared about deeply. In every country she had lived, she had sought out organizations that helped refugees and immigrant families. She knew what it felt like to be an outsider, to struggle with language and culture and belonging. Helping others going through similar experiences gave her a sense of purpose, but she had never talked about any of this at Riverside High. She had never wanted the attention, I'm not sure. Priya said slowly, "I don't really like being in the spotlight." Mrs. Okonkwo leaned forward slightly. "I understand. But Priya, sometimes the people who are most reluctant to speak are the ones who need to be heard the most. You have a perspective that very few students in this school could offer. Your experiences could open minds and change hearts." She paused, her expression softening. "I've also heard about what's been going on, the difficulties you've faced since arriving here. I want you to know that I'm aware of the situation and it's being addressed. But I also think this assembly could be an opportunity for you, a chance for people to see who you really are." Priya sat with that for a moment. Part of her wanted to say no, to keep her head down and finish out the school year in peace. But another part of her, the part that had spoken up in the cafeteria, was tired of hiding. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." News of the assembly spread quickly, as news always does in high school. By the end of the day, it seemed like everyone knew that the quiet new girl had been invited to speak at a district-wide event. Because her mother was some kind of important diplomat. The reactions were mixed. Some students seemed genuinely interested, asking Priya questions about the country she had lived in and what her mother's job was like. Others were skeptical, muttering that she had probably been playing the victim this whole time while secretly thinking she was better than everyone. But the most interesting reaction came from an unexpected source. Priya was at her locker after final period. When she sensed someone approaching, she turned and found herself face to face with Brittany. The girl looked different. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something uncertain and almost fragile. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying. "Can we talk?" Brittany asked quietly. "Please?" Priya studied her for a long moment. Every instinct told her to walk away, to protect herself from whatever new game this might be. But something in Brittany's expression made her pause. The girl standing in front of her didn't look like the same person who had terrorized her for weeks. "Okay," Priya said. "Talk." Brittany glanced around nervously. The hallway was starting to empty, but there were still a few students lingering nearby. "Not here," she said. "Can we go somewhere private?" Against her better judgment, Priya agreed. They walked to a quiet corner of the library. Tucked away behind rows of dusty reference books that nobody ever used. Brittany stood there for a moment, arms crossed over her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I heard about the assembly, about your mom, about all the stuff you've done." She paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't know any of that. I just saw this quiet girl who didn't seem to care about fitting in, and I thought. I don't know what I thought. That you were judging us or something. That you thought you were too good for this place." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out you actually did have a reason to think you were better than us. You've lived this whole amazing life, and you never once bragged about it. You never tried to make anyone feel small. That was just me." Priya remained silent, letting Brittany continue. "What you said in the cafeteria," Brittany went on, her voice cracking, "about why I need to make people feel small. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. And the answer is, I don't know. I really don't know why I'm like this. But I hate it. I hate who I've become." Tears were streaming down her face now. She wiped at them angrily. Embarrassed to be crying in front of the girl she had tormented, Priya watched her for a long moment. She thought about all the pain Brittany had caused her. The ruined books, the lonely lunches, the public humiliation. Part of her wanted to turn around and leave Brittany to deal with her own mess, but another part of her remembered what Mrs. Patterson had said about the quiet ones being the strongest, about seeing more than people realized. And right now, what she saw was a broken girl who had never learned a better way to exist in the world. "Why are you telling me this?" Priya asked softly. Brittany looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Because I owe you an apology. A real one. And because—" she hesitated. "Because I want to know how you do it. How you stay so calm when everything is falling apart. How you keep going when everyone is against you." Priya considered the question. It was the most honest thing Brittany had ever said to her. "I don't have all the answers," Priya said finally. "But I can tell you that it starts with asking the right questions. The ones you're finally starting to ask yourself." For the first time, Brittany didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, tears still falling, looking like someone who had just woken up from a very long sleep, and Priya realized that this story wasn't just about her anymore. It was about both of them, and it was far from over. The weeks that followed were strange for everyone at Riverside. It was like the whole social order had been shaken up and nobody quite knew where they stood anymore. Brittany received a 2-week suspension for the bullying incidents. The school had launched a full investigation after the videos went viral, and multiple students had come forward with their own stories. It turned out Priya wasn't the first person Brittany had targeted over the years. She was just the first one who had refused to break. While Brittany was gone, the hallways felt different, quieter somehow. Her group of followers scattered, unsure of how to act without their leader. Some of them even approached Priya to apologize for their part in what had happened. Most of the apologies felt hollow, more about saving face than genuine remorse. But Priya accepted them anyway. Holding on to anger had never been her style. During those 2 weeks, Priya focused on preparing for the assembly. She spent hours writing and rewriting her speech, trying to find the right words to describe her experiences without sounding like she was bragging or looking for sympathy. It was harder than she expected. Her mother helped when she could, offering suggestions between her own busy schedule of meetings and international calls. One evening, they sat together at the kitchen table, papers spread out between them, and her mother said something Priya would never forget. "You don't have to make yourself smaller for other people to feel comfortable," her mother said, squeezing her hand. "Your story matters. Your voice matters. And the right people will appreciate that." Priya carried those words with her as the day of the assembly approached. The morning of the event, the school auditorium was packed. Students from 3 different schools had been bussed in, along with teachers, administrators, and even a few local reporters covering the district's new global awareness initiative. Priya stood backstage, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had spoken in front of crowds before, at smaller events in other countries, but this felt different. This was the school where she had been humiliated, where she had eaten alone for weeks, where she had almost given up hope of ever belonging, and now she was about to stand on that stage and tell her story. She peeked through the curtain and scanned the audience. She spotted Mrs. Okonkwo in the front row. Smiling encouragingly, Mrs. Patterson was there too, giving her a small wave. And then, in the back corner, she saw someone she didn't expect. Brittany. She had returned from her suspension just 2 days earlier. Priya hadn't spoken to her since their conversation in the library. She had assumed Brittany would avoid the assembly entirely, not wanting to witness Priya's moment in the spotlight, but there she was, sitting alone in the last row, looking smaller than Priya had ever seen her. A staff member tapped Priya on the shoulder. "You're up in 2 minutes." Priya nodded, taking a deep breath. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The ruined books, the spilled food, the whispers and the loneliness, the confrontation in the cafeteria. The question that had changed everything. And she realized something important. This speech wasn't just for the audience. It wasn't just about global awareness or youth, leadership, or any of the official reasons she had been invited. It was for every kid who had ever felt invisible. Every person who had been made to feel like they didn't belong, every quiet soul who had been underestimated and overlooked, including the girl sitting alone in the back row. When Priya walked onto the stage, the applause was polite but uncertain. Most of these people had no idea who she was. They saw a small, unassuming teenager in a simple dress, clutching a few note cards, like a lifeline, but then she started to speak. She told them about moving to her first new country at age 7. Unable to speak the language, crying herself to sleep every night for a month. She told them about the friends she had made and lost, the cultures she had learned to navigate. The feeling of always being an outsider looking in. She told them about the refugee camps she had visited, the children she had met who had lost everything and still found reasons to smile. She told them about a 12-year-old girl in Jordan who had taught her how to braid hair, even though they didn't share a common language. About a boy in Germany who had walked 3 countries to escape a war and still dreamed of becoming a doctor. She told them that strength wasn't about being loud or powerful or popular. It was about getting back up when life knocked you down. It was about choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. It was about seeing the humanity in others, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. By the time she finished, the auditorium was completely silent. Then slowly the applause began. It started in the front row and spread backward like a wave, growing louder and louder until it filled the entire room. Priya stood there, tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by a feeling she couldn't quite name. Acceptance, maybe? Or belonging? Or simply being seen for who she really was. As she walked off the stage, she glanced toward the back of the auditorium. Brittany was still there, but she wasn't applauding. She was crying. Silent tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Their eyes met for just a second. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. But the beginning of understanding. After the assembly, Priya was surrounded by students wanting to talk to her, ask questions, shake her hand. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. For the first time since arriving at Riverside High, she felt like she might actually belong here, but there was one conversation she still needed to have. She found Brittany outside, sitting on a bench near the parking lot. The girl looked up when Priya approached, quickly wiping her eyes. "That was really good," Brittany said quietly. "Your speech. It was, I don't know. It made me feel things I didn't want to feel." Priya sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. That's usually how growth starts. Feeling uncomfortable. Brittany laughed bitterly. "I've been feeling uncomfortable for weeks. Ever since that day in the cafeteria. I keep replaying it in my head, wondering how I became this person. Have you figured it out?" Brittany was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My parents are getting divorced. They've been fighting for years, but it got really bad last summer. And I guess ... I don't know. I was so angry all the time, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I took it out on other people." "On you?" She looked at Priya with red-rimmed eyes. "That's not an excuse." "I know that. There's no excuse for what I did. I just wanted you to know that it was never really about you. It was always about me and my own garbage." Priya nodded slowly. She had suspected something like this. Hurt people hurt people. It was one of the oldest truths in the world. "What are you going to do now?" Priya asked. Brittany shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Try to be better, I guess. But I don't even know where to start." Priya thought about it for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's a youth mentorship program at the community center downtown," she said, handing the paper to Brittany. "They work with kids from tough situations, help them with homework, just give them someone to talk to. I've been volunteering there since I moved here." Brittany looked at the paper like it might bite her. "You want me to volunteer? After everything I did to you?" "I think you need something to focus on besides yourself," Priya said honestly. "And I think being around kids who are struggling might give you some perspective, help you realize that everyone is fighting their own battles." She paused, then added softly, "Hurt people hurt people." But healed people can help heal others. Maybe it's time you started healing. Brittany stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took the paper and folded it carefully into her pocket. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I was horrible to you." "I don't deserve this." Priya stood up and looked down at the girl who had once made her life miserable. She thought about everything they had both been through. The pain, the growth, the unexpected path that had brought them to this moment. "Because holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it," she said. "And because I believe people can change? But you have to actually do the work, Brittany. You have to want to be different." She started to walk away, then paused and looked back. "I'll see you at the community center. Don't be late." And with that, Priya walked back toward the school, toward the friends she was finally starting to make, toward the life she was building in this strange new place. Behind her, Brittany sat on the bench for a long time, holding the folded paper like a lifeline. For the first time in months, she felt something other than anger and emptiness. She felt hope. And somewhere in the distance, the bell rang, calling everyone back to class, back to ordinary life. But for two girls at Riverside High, nothing would ever be ordinary again. They had both been changed by what happened. And sometimes that's exactly how the best stories end. Not with a villain defeated, but with two people finding their way toward something better, together.